Okay, hello, this is Jonathan Morris, and I'm going to be going over the multiplier homework today. So the first question is, what has a bigger effect, a change in government spending or a change in taxes? Now, Mr. Russell told us it was a change in government spending. That's why it's the first question. It's so important to understand that the government spending is way more important because with that, if it's money transfers, for example, people are going to take that money and then they're going to expend it in the economy, and then the people who receive that money are going to spend it. It's going to have much more of a ripple effect than before if it was just taxes. And now for the second question. Now the second question is asking if the government increases spending $100 in a country whose citizens spend 50% of every extra dollar they get, what will the effect on aggregate demand be? So we know that they increased it 100, right? And we know that we have to divide how much they increase spending by, or how much they need to, and we have to divide that by the multiplier to get how much money that they spent. But in this case, since we already know how much they spent, we need to see how much of an effect that is going to have on the economy. So if we know that the MPC is 50% or 0.5, we know that 1 minus the MPC is going to be the MPS, which is what we need to find the multiplier for government spending. And that will be 0.5 as well, because we need to get both of those numbers equal to 1. And then the multiplier is 1 over the MPS, right here, that guy. So 1 over 1/2, or 1 over 0.5, is 2. So we know that the multiplier is going to be 2. And since we increase spending by 1,000, we need to multiply that by 2, and that will have a $200 effect on the economy. And the next question is, in number 2, what would the amount be if they decreased taxes by $100? So for number 3, the multiplier for taxes is 1, or is the multiplier of government spending minus 1. So that would be 2, which we found from the previous problem, subtracted from 1, and that would equal 1. So 1 times $100, it'll just have an $100 effect, which also plays into the fact that government spending will have a bigger effect on our economy. So for number 4, here's my graph. Remember, AD slopes downward, and that is the C plus I plus G plus X minus IM. And so specifically, we're going to be dealing with government spending. That's why it's asking how much. On the second question, that was why I was asking for the effect on aggregate demand, not on aggregate supply. So the next question is if the economy has a real GDP of $120 and potential GDP is 100, or sorry, the real GDP is $120 and the potential GDP is 100, how much government cut spending if the MPS is 10%? So luckily, we know that this time that we already know the MPS, so we don't have to do any subtracting by 1 or anything like that. So we can do 1 over. Now 10% is 10 over 100, which simplifies to 1 over 10. So 1 over 1 over 10 equals 10. So we know that the multiplier is going to be equal to 10. And we know that we need to fill in the gap of $20, right? So we take how much we need to spend, and we divide that by the multiplier, which will be $2. So we need to spend $2 we need to cut spending, we need to cut spending by $2 in order to get the real GDP back down to $100. Now the next question is, if the US is in a recession and real GDP is $50 below the potential GDP of 150, how much should the government increase spending to end the recession if the MPC is 80%? So I guess another thing to note is that since we're in a recession, right, the aggregate demand point of equilibrium with the SRAS, that is going to be to the left. Notice how when we were overperforming in the economy, we were to the right of the long-run aggregate supply line. So with this one, right, we have the MPC being 80%, which is 0.8, or 8 over 10, right? But we need to know the MPS to find the multiplier, so we do 10 over 10, which is just 1, minus 8 over 10. That's going to be equal to 2 over 10. So we need to do 1 over 2 over 10, which equals 10 over 2, which equals 5. So the multiplier is going to be 5. And we know that we need to cover the gap of $50 to get the economy back up to standard and not being in a recession anymore. So what we do is we take that $50 we need to spend, divide it by the multiplier, and we get $10 that needs to be spent. So the next, if the multiplier was 5, how much does the government cut taxes if they need to close a recessionary gap of $1,000? So we know that the tax multiplier is going to be, the multiplier of government spending minus 1. So if we know the multiplier is 5, we can subtract 1. Our tax multiplier will be 4, right? So basically, if we take the 1,000 that we need to spend, right, and we divide that by 4, we get $250. So we will have to spend we should cut taxes, by $250 in order to, is that in frame? Yeah, it's in frame. $250 in order for us to be out of a recession. And for number 7, now it's saying the U.S. is $20,000 above potential GDP of $10,000. So I guess right off the bat, if we're $20,000 above $10,000, that will be $30,000, as I kind of marked here. And it's asking how much does the government need to cut spending to close the inflationary gap if the MPC is 0.8. Now, we know if the MPC is going to be 8 over 10 or 0.8, we need to subtract 1 by that to get the MPS, and that will be 2 over 10. So we know that the MPC is going to be 5, because 1 over 2 over 10 will equal 10 over 2, which equals 5, right? So basically, the MPS, or the multiplier, is going to be 10, or 5. So we take the gap that we need, 20,000, right? And we need to divide that by our multiplier, which is 5. So that means that we have to spend just $4,000 to make up that $20,000 gap to get back to a safe economic growth. Now, for number 8, it's asking basically the same question, but how much should they raise taxes by? So basically, we need to subtract that multiplier, which is 5. We subtract 5 minus 1, and our multiplier for the tax is going to be 4. So we take our gap once again, 20,000, divide that by 4, and that means we'll have to spend more money. We'll have to raise taxes by $5,000 to make up the gap. And this has been Jonathan Morris, and I hope you understand the multiplier better.